Hi everyone, and welcome to the lesson on education and society. Today we're going to be talking about the role that education has in society, and in particular how it has a role in social inequality. While schools are intended to provide opportunities, and for some people they certainly do, for others they certainly don't. Overall, when you take a look at the education system as an institution and take a step back, remove our personal biases, we see that the outcomes that education has in our society demonstrate that schools are set up to stratify students based on the backgrounds from which they come from. So that poorer students receive less benefits from the education system, and wealthier students receive more benefits from the education system. Let's take a look at the outcomes that we're talking about. When we look at parents' income and children's test scores, we see that there is a direct correlation. Parents' income certainly influences a child's test scores, and we can think about the many reasons why this is, having to do with resources or lack of resources related to income. You can kind of see how a child's test scores can be affected by a parent's income. It's also important to remember when thinking about the education gap based on race, that a higher proportion of Hispanic and Black children come from low-income families, and this can help explain their lower test scores. High-income students have reading and math scores that are 2 or 3 grades above their grade level, and while at the same time low-income students have scores that are 2 or 3 grades below their grade level. So you can get an idea of what this difference looks like. It's no small difference, and it definitely is a sign that a family's income can influence a child's ability to learn the same material. We know that there is no difference between children mentally wise from low income and high income. The factor is environmental, right? The reason for this disparity has to be environmental. So it's also that it's not just a matter of it being up to the individual. For example, a lot of people will say, well, at the end of the day, it's up to the kid as to how bad he wants to learn or how bad he wants to do. He or she can't control the social environment or environmental factors like income or where they live, etc. But they can control how they perform in school, how hard they try in school, how much they listen to the teacher, how much effort they put into their studies, etc. While this is true, it is also true that we have some policies that are directly set up to create this social inequality. So these policies certainly don't help. So for example, some districts have less money than others. One stark example can be found in Illinois. The Ridge District in Illinois has about $9,000 to spend per student. Meanwhile, the Randout District, which is about an hour north of Ridge District, has about $28,000 to spend per student. So where does this difference come from? Why does the Ridge District get more than the Randout District, and why doesn't the government do anything about it? Well, it all goes back to the way that our taxes are set up. Local taxes from businesses and homes help fund schools. And so that can create a huge disparity between wealthier areas and low-income areas where the businesses aren't doing as well, or the homes and property values are not as high. This helps reproduce social inequality so that wealthy areas have wealthier schools and poorer areas have poorer schools and less money to spend on their students. You can see how this can be a double bind if a student is coming from a low-income background, and we know that what effect that has on their test scores. Now on top of this, not only do they have a low-income background, they also have a low-income school environment where you're not spending as much on each student as you should. So the point here is that it's not just about it's up to the individual. Yes, that's part of it, but at the same time, our policies directly shape inequality, and we kind of have to, awaken ourselves to this reality. Personal accountability and individual efforts can only do so much. At this, at the same time that students are trying hard, we also need to, restructure our policy a little bit so that the poor kids are receiving just as much benefits as kids from wealthier backgrounds. Um, an important concept in the sociology of education is known as the hidden curriculum, and we're going to be talking about this when we talk about functionalism and conflict theory in the next couple of slides. So the hidden curriculum are the non-academic and subtle socialization functions of schooling. Basically, they're the hidden lessons that you learn while at school. So on top of the reading and math and science and art and music that you get at school, you're also being taught these subtle things about how to behave, the attitude that you should have, about the certain rules in society. And so the hidden curriculum is just as much a part of going to school as reading and writing. What's important for sociologists is that the hidden curriculum is not taught by any one individual person, meaning that the teacher is not really the one teaching this hidden curriculum. The hidden curriculum is an institutional phenomenon, meaning that it's something that is taught by the school. The unit of analysis here being the school itself, the school culture that is created by everybody's collective efforts, including teachers, administrators, secretaries, and the students themselves also help create this hidden curriculum. So some basic examples of the hidden curriculum are things like the importance of punctuality. School starts at a specific time, and you're supposed to be there at a specific time. Again, this is sending the message that punctuality is important, and there's policies in place for punishing the lack of punctuality. Another example is attitudes toward authority. For the main part, you're supposed to respect authority, disagree respectfully, even when you don't totally agree with the authority figures. At school, you're supposed to at least disagree in a respectful manner. Another example are following the rules, following norms, kind of falling in line with the rest of the class. If the class is doing something, you're also supposed to be engaged in that activity, not doing your own thing. So it teaches you to be part of a group and to follow the norms. The other thing too, another example are teaching the importance of personal property. Believe it or not, this has to be taught, and schools are one of the ways in which this gets taught. So respecting other people's personal property, personal space as well can be kind of part of that as well. Let's turn our attention to what functionalists would argue are the main purposes of schooling in our society. They would argue that schools serve to transmit values, beliefs, and attitudes that are important to society. This is done largely through the hidden curriculum by teaching students what to value and what the proper attitude to have is while you're at school. Functionalists further argue that there are two main functions of schools, that is to educate students and to socialize them. We just went over some of the socialization factors involved in the functions of schooling. Let's talk about the actual education part, because functionalists would say that that's an important part too. So they argue that schools teach general skills, at least at the K through 12 and college level. You're supposed to learn these basic skills that will make you an employable and marketable person in the workplace. Then you have more specific schools like vocational schools that teach really specific skills, theories, and techniques about a particular occupation, such as carpentry or mechanics or construction. So these vocational schools are often an option for students that don't want to follow the traditional route of K through 12 and a college education. So functionalists would say that's a good thing. On top of that, for those that want to advance their studies, you have professional and graduate schools, such as law schools or any number of graduate schools that teach skills needed for particular professions. So entering the professional world, which is a world of high-level critical thinking, team building, team working, those kinds of things that are important in those fields. All of this falls under the concept of human capital. So human capital refers to the knowledge and skills that make someone marketable in our economy. And human capital is what is kind of supposed to be gained after you get it, after you go through an education. And functionalists would say that the human capital that you obtain from the education system is the right one for the occupation that you're supposed to end up in. That somehow schools are these great big sorting machines that sort people based on their prerequisite skills, and they match them up with human capital that makes sense to them, and then they find a job that matches their human capital and their own personal interests. Conflict theorists, on the other hand, would say that this sorting of students has a different purpose. So when it comes to sorting, what we're talking about is the role that education has in sorting students into their different positions in the economy and also in life as well. So all of the various occupations out there, they all required some kind of schooling. There was some kind of educational history behind them. And so the idea of sorting is to get people into these occupations appropriately. So for conflict theorists, sorting is not merit-based. We have this belief in our society in meritocracy that justifies all sorts of social inequalities. A lot of wealthy people or wealthy families or students that, young children that come from wealthier backgrounds don't really realize the privilege that they have. That privilege is kind of invisible to them, and so they think that they got to the position where they are by merit alone, that they're just that amazing and great. And conflict theorists, they would say, sure, they may be great, they may be really special, but so is a poor kid, right? So is a low-income kid. So it's not necessarily our education system and our sorting system is not necessarily merit-based. A truly merit-based system would mean that students are sorted solely on their efforts and not their parents' class position. But it's very clear that in our education system that some kids get a head start and additional resources and additional benefits from going to school. Meanwhile, other children who tend to come from low-income backgrounds, despite their efforts, are at a huge disadvantage in our society. And so for conflict theorists, the education as an institution is not necessarily something that just objectively sorts students into occupations. The education system is designed by elites, and therefore the education system is going to reproduce social inequality that already exists in our society. So when it comes to the examples that conflict theorists point to, one of them is, as we talked about, tax-based funding, where public schools get their money basically from local taxes. Another example is tracking, where students from who are low achieving get placed on slower tracks, thus slowing them down even further. And then lastly, the Pygmalion effect, where low achieving students receive lower expectations and thus self-fulfill those low expectations.